Hello, everyone. My name is Thomas, and our reading today is in 2 Samuel chapters 8 and 9 and 1 Chronicles chapter 18. What a great couple chapters in 1 Samuel. In 2 Samuel, not 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. But the chapter that we see in Chronicles over here is what I want to point out really quick, because if you notice it, it's actually almost an exact copy of 2 Samuel chapter 8. And that's not by mistake. In fact, if we're reading in our Bibles that we have, 2 Chronicles is not at the end of the Old Testament, but it would have been at the end of the original Hebrew Bible, meaning that 1st and 2nd Chronicles was not just a copy and a boring restatement, but 1st and 2nd Chronicles is a recap and wrap up and really a focus on certain things that happened in the life of David and of Israel that really wants us to focus on. And so in this recap here, we see that it's important, and what we see in 2 Samuel chapter 8, the importance of David's victories here. We see that David is very victorious in 2 Samuel chapter 8. But it's not by his own doing, even though it says that David kind of made a name for himself. It's not a prideful way that he's talking about. What it's actually saying here is that David was victorious because God made him victorious. At the beginning of 2 Samuel chapter 8 starts with the word after, which means we need to look before that. And we see that David is following God as king, that he's honoring God. He promises to honor God with everything that he has. And he does continue to do that. And so in 2 Samuel chapter 8, he's victorious because the Lord gives him victory over that. In fact, in 2 Samuel 8, starting in verse 6, it says, "And the Lord gave victory to David wherever he went." Wherever he went. It says it again in verse 14, actually, which should perk our eyes up a little bit because he says it twice. We need to see that this is not David's victory just because David is a great king. It's because the Lord is giving him victory over that. Such great enemies. It even says that another king sent him blessings because of the enemies that he defeated. Another king was having such trouble, and David defeated his enemies as well. There's just all these enemies, great enemies that he's defeating. And the people are blessed in Israel because of that, because the Lord is faithful to do so. It's just the Lord's work. It's the Lord's work in doing this. And so David is victorious because he is the true king under the truer king, King Jesus, or the Lord God is the true king. And so what a great thing we see here in chapter 9. We see that David's faithfulness to be the kind of king that God has called him to be continues, because David keeps his promises to Jonathan, his friend, who is King Saul's son. David makes the promise to Jonathan that his house would not be destroyed. And so in chapter 9, you see David looking for any kind of heir from Jonathan's house. And he searches. They find a servant of Jonathan's household, of Solomon's household. And he says, "Is there anybody left?" And he says, "There's one man. His name is Mephibosheth." What a great name, right? Try to say that a few times. It's a good mouth workout, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is this heir, this son of Jonathan, his friend. And David brings him in, and we find out that Mephibosheth, again, it says twice in here, Mephibosheth is lame at the feet. He can't walk, but David brings him in. Now, Mephibosheth probably would have been seen as a man of lower value because he was crippled, but not just because of his physical ailment, but because people probably would have seen him as having sinned. Back in this time when someone had this kind of ailment, like couldn't walk, couldn't see, or anything like that, they would have equated it wrongfully, but they would have equated it with having sinned because of this, to cause this. And so David, regardless of how people saw him, regardless of him not being able to walk, David says, "I'm going to honor this man." Nothing because of what he's done. He's not done anything to earn this. In fact, David could have easily destroyed his household like many other kings would have in that time. If they took over, if a new reign took over, they could have destroyed the old house. But David doesn't do that. He honors Mephibosheth and says, "You're going to eat at my table. Bring this man to the king's table for the rest of his life. He's going to eat from my table. His land is going to be blessed. His servants are going to be blessed. His servants' are going to be blessed." David just lavishes this kind of blessing on him. And what an amazing picture we see, because we know that David is a picture of Christ, a foretelling of Christ. Christ is of the line of David, of King David, of whose house will forever be blessed and will forever reign. We see David taking someone who is seen as so sinful that he can't get up himself. And David says, bring him, carry him to my table, and he will eat from my table the rest of his life. Nothing because of what he's done, but because I'm a good king. I will bless him because I see him as having great value, and I will honor him. And that's what Christ does for us, right? We are sinful people who cannot get up on our own, who are doomed to suffer the rest of our lives in our sin. But Christ sees us, and he brings us, he carries us to his table. Psalm 23, I love how Psalm 23 talks about how he prepares a table before us in the presence of our enemies. He brings us in, and he puts us at the table. What a wonderful picture. What a wonderful picture we get here of David's faithfulness as king, as ruling over and victorious, but also a king who is very faithful to keep his promises to his people, to Jonathan, to his household, and to Mephibosheth. Hey, I hope you're enjoying your reading. Continue on strong in that. May God bless you as you're doing that.